Oh, hello, listeners. Just a note before we begin this week's episode. We love making Polity Matters, and we've enjoyed our first year so much. We're so glad to be in season 2, and we're going to continue to make Polity Matters as long as you keep listening to it, and, well, maybe even when you eventually stop. But it does cost a little bit for us to produce this podcast. We have some monthly costs, like hosting and recording. If Polity Matters has been a benefit to you, and honestly, even if it hasn't, would you consider helping us out? Go to buymeacoffee.com/politymatters. You can find the link in the show notes, and there you can donate, or you can get set up with the exclusive Polity Matters Blue Brick membership. We aren't trying to make a living off of this podcast, but we do need to cover some of our small monthly costs. Anything over our expenses will go to purchasing swag and maybe some giveaways across the course of the year. So we'd appreciate any support you can give us. Thanks so much. Be sure to stay tuned for exclusive offers that might come through that site, other ways that we may try to support some of our work. We want to make this valuable for you and give you as much as we can. Thanks so much for being a Polity Matters listener. We couldn't do this without you. Now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to Polity Matters. My name is Ben Ratliff, and I'm joined by Jared Nelson and Scott Edberg, and we are excited to be in BCO chapter 17. We're going to be talking
if we get through
today,
it.
But yeah, for real, it's a lengthy one. The content here may prevent us from finishing, but we'll do the best we can. Talking about the Doctrine of Ordination, but before that, I wanted to touch base with the guys, check in with the guys. I guess I mixed those two up just now. Anyway, what's going on, fellas? The time travel of recording is very confusing for me. Like, I don't know what people have listened to recently. I don't know what's coming next because we're recording, at different times and spacing them out. But what's going on in your world? Scott, you read anything good lately?
I've not read anything all summer.
Have you listened to any good books lately?
No.
Have you listened to any books?
I don't listen to any books.
I think I kept asking good, but no, you're not going to answer the question.
No,
Okay.
I don't read anything. I've taken the summer off of reading. I'm gonna make you restart this whole thing.
Those are great sunglasses, by the way. Jared, what about you? Anything on your bookshelf that's worth taking down?
Yeah, I've actually started reading this book called Sword and Scimitar, which is a history of the conflicts between Christian Europe and the rise of Islam. And it's very interesting, but very bloody and disturbing. So I'm only like in the 700s right now, but yeah, it was pretty bloody.
I'm just looking around my office trying to figure out what I can. I mean, it's my home office for the record. I'm not at the church. There's some.
Is Scott going to admit to reading Dune or not?
I hear that those who have read those books, they are also bloody books, and a lot of people
Dune
die.
Books?
Yeah, they do. A lot of people die. They do a lot of drugs. The author did a lot of drugs. But yeah, I'm reading some of Dune, yeah.
I can't see my bookshelf from where I'm sitting here, but I see some bourbon bottles. If anybody out there likes Bardstown bourbon, you got to find some of their local Origin series stuff. It's very good.
Ben doesn't read, he drinks. I
might have just lost a bunch of listeners by saying that. No, I drink a couple pours of a good bourbon on Sunday nights. That's about all we do. Really, that killed all of this banter? Like, come on, y'all are crazy. All right, sunglasses, let's get going. We're in BCO 17. If you pull it up online, it'll take up not even the whole screen of your smartphone. So find it, read it while we go through. Let's see, what do we need to do to introduce this? So last time we talked about vocation. And to use Ramsey to frame up the thought a little bit, he says vocation is the concurrent testimony of the Spirit of God through the man's own inner conviction, through the election by the people, and through the approval by the court that he should be inducted into office. That's vocation. And he differentiates and says ordination is the formal induction into that office. So it's not that sense of calling and approval of that calling, but it's the actual getting into the office. And what that looks like. And so there's these three, he calls them paragraphs. I actually think we can say there's 3 sentences about vocation, about ordination here. Who does the ordaining? What is ordination, and what you're ordained unto? So BCO 17:1, those who have been called to office in the church are to be inducted by the ordination of a court. I'm sure the guys have something to say, but I mean, I'll point you back to Witherow. This is one of the foundation, one of his 6 principles of the Apostolic Church, ordination by the elders. Who is to do the ordaining? The answer is church courts, which is pointing us to the joint power of our church courts. You can't ordain alone, and we may talk about an exception to that, but it's the courts that do that. What's the significance here, guys? I mean, what's to talk about from this sentence?
Well, this is tied in with chapter 16, and so they work hand in hand together pretty well. And so when we were thinking about what ordination is, you have to connect it back to what we talked about last week with vocation. As Ben defined it with the 2 different definitions, ordination is done in light of a call to vocation. And so you're not just ordained to be ordained. There is a purpose to that ordination, and that is the calling, the vocational calling of a man. And so it would be helpful then, while you're reading perhaps 17:1, 2, and 3, to also have 16:1 in your mind to prep you for, well, who is ordained? It's not just anyone. It's those who are called to vocational ministry, and ordinary vocational ministry is tied to the offices of elder and deacon. And so you don't just get ordained to be ordained, you're ordained to a definite office, whether it be elder or deacon.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting how short this section is, and part of that might be because for us, ordination is not a sacrament like it is in the Catholic Church. We would say it's an ordinance, which all sacraments are ordinances, but not all ordinances are sacraments. And so this is an important topic that I think probably needs some more work done in the Reformed world. I have a friend who complains that basically the most that we have to talk about this is about 14 pages in Bannerman. That's pretty much the biggest exposition of ordination in Reformed academic literature. So this is something that we probably should be thinking and reflecting more on. What goes on in ordination? I mean, it almost has some tones of a sacrament in that you're setting a person apart, right? That's part of what's being done here. Is the church is calling this person to work that's different than what he's had before for particular use, even though we would say this is not a sacrament, but it is still a high thing. It's a high service in terms of like high priority in our minds of it's important. You get invited to an installation or ordination as a minister. That's a high honor for somebody to invite you to preach there or to give the charge to the congregation or to you.
So just to dial in a little bit more to 17:1, and then we'll move on to 17:2, because I think all of us are sort of trying to reach for that. Who ordains? There's 2 main courts that do ordaining. The session ordains, so you would see a session of a church ordain ruling elders and deacons, and then the presbytery ordains teaching elders. There's one exception. I don't. Does Ben Coppers have the ability to ordain elders if he wants to, or did they refrain from granting him that privilege, Scott? I can't remember.
I don't know.
Because that's in the second tier for evangelists, right? So evangelists have the ability to go out and do the work that a session would normally do, but if they can be granted a second level of power, so to speak, and basically function as a commission to ordain ruling elders.
I believe he has a temporary government then, so I think that temporary government would probably oversee that.
That's true. Yeah.
It's one of the distinctive images, though, in your mind of the difference between an Episcopalian form of government and a Presbyterian one. Is one of the most famous Presbyterian pictures is the ordaining of elders, where you have them all around a table and a prayer that's being said. Versus, I had a friend who was in the Reformed Episcopal Church. He invited me to his ordination service, and it was just him in front of a bishop, one man. And I said, okay, here's a picture of the differences between our 2 forms of government here.
Was it Ben Coppers in at that service that was ordaining him, or was it no? Okay.
It was not.
We love you, Ben.
When you're thinking about the jurisdiction of ordination, we can build on that a little more, I think.
Yeah.
For laity, for those who are not seminary clergy, They are ordained at the local level, so the church, and their membership resides within that local body. And so your ruling elders and your deacons, they remain local members of that church, and they are ordained within the context of that church by the leaders in that church, by the elders in that church. For the pastor, it's different in that their membership is at the regional level, where they are ordained at the regional level under the oversight of the elders ruling and teaching of the regional presbytery. And their membership remains at the presbytery level. They aren't voting members in the congregation. They are members of the regional presbytery. And so that gets back to perhaps what we've talked about before, where the presbytery is the one that oversees and cares for the pastors as they are ordained and members there, not the congregations. The congregations can care for the ruling elders and their deacons. But the jurisdiction, I think, is helpful when you're thinking about the idea of ordination. Perhaps it's unique. I know some Dutch denominations, the minister is a member of the local church, but not in ours.
Yeah, is this another place where we bleed into the question about 2 versus 3 office? I mean, maybe we're not
That's just
quite
what I
as
was gonna ask.
consistent. Yeah. Oh, do you have a thought on it? I mean, no, just
It's just very odd that we try to talk about the equity or the equality between the ruling elders and teaching elders, and yet the teaching elder is a member of presbytery and the ruling elder is a member of the local church.
Okay. Well, here we'll keep the thought going. 17:2 reads that ordination is the authoritative admission of one duly called to an office in the church of God, accompanied with prayer and the laying on of hands, to which it is proper to add the giving of the right hand of fellowship. Any candidates or interns out there that are listening, 17:2 is not a bad sentence to have memorized for when you come up for examinations, just to know what ordination is and to know what's got to happen. So there's a little bit in here. We've got kind of the clear definition of what ordination is, and then some of the components of the act of ordaining a man. The authoritative admission of one duly called to an office in the church. Again, to Scott's point earlier, 16 and 17 bleed together. We've talked about a lot of these things. What nuance in here, guys, do we need to tease out a little bit?
You have to be admitted to the office of elder or deacon in the PCA. You can't just declare that you're a pastor. There is an authoritative admission. A church court has to allow you or to permit you to become an ordained pastor or deacon or elder in the church. And so it's not something that you yourself can just take a hold of and you can declare yourself, I am an elder, I'm a pastor. No, it's actually a work of the church, and recognizing your gifts, as we talked about vocational inward and external call. When the presbytery recognizes those gifts and you've gone through the gauntlet of examination and testing, then that authoritative admission is granted of becoming an elder in the church or deacon.
And that's humanly speaking about where that authority comes from a group of people. Although I think here the note of it's accompanied with prayer shows us that they are discerning, has God called this person to a needful work? So there's also there the agency of God, that reliance and dependence on him that's noted with prayer. I do think it might be interesting to talk a little bit about laying on of hands, because prayer and laying on of hands seems essential here. Smith notes that the giving of the right hand of friendship is proper. It's not essential. In other words, if they don't do that at your ordination service, they don't overturn it or something. But 2 things should be there, and that's prayer and the laying on of hands. What do you guys make of the laying on of hands? Like, what is that all about?
I don't want dudes touching me. That's how I feel. It's weird. Laying on of hands is from 1 Timothy 4, right?
4:14, the gift that was given to you by the laying on of hands. Yeah.
There you go.
But mentioned elsewhere, I think, in also later on in 1 Timothy 5, not to be too hasty with the laying on of hands. Earlier, I think in Acts 13:6, somewhere in there.
Why bother opening my Bible? I can just ask Jared where to quote all of it. I mean, I hear guys talk about it, it's laying on of hands is specifically just for ordination, not for installation. But then I know guys that differ, that are going to lay hands on a man when he's installed at a future point in his ministry. If he's not being ordained at a church, has already been ordained, is going to be installed at subsequent church, and they still will lay hands on him for that, to set him apart for that particular work. Whereas I guess the other side of that is that we would say that only at ordination do you lay hands on to set a man apart to that office. I don't know if we want to debate that or not, but
Smith calls installation something of a secondary ordination.
yeah.
So they're very closely interrelated. One thing I was wondering about with the laying on of hands is some reformers. I was trying to find the reference. I've heard Calvin even want to shy away from the actual act. That's partly because of the superstition of Rome, that there was something almost magical happening in that. He had kind of the same view of when you call the elders for prayer and anoint them with oil. Well, should you do that if people have superstitions around that? But here it seems our practice is you are definitely going to lay hands on them while you're praying, while you're setting them apart. I didn't know if you guys had any thoughts though about like what's being symbolized there, what's happening there, because there's also some debate over what's the gift, what gift is being given, according to 1 Timothy 4:14.
I mean, well, okay. I didn't know we were going to talk about this question. I haven't thought about this until actually in this moment. Is it possible that we could refer it back to like Ephesians 4 language of gifts, that Christ has given the officers as gifts to the church? And so we see that in the laying on of hands, that there's a gift aspect. Jared's sort of halfway nodding. I just want the record to show that he didn't scowl at me after I said that.
I think this is one of the reasons that there's more work I think that needs to be done. I mean, who's answered some of these questions of really trying to dig into what's happening in ordination? Is there some sort of blessing that's coming along with this, kind of like what we talk about with other ordinances in the church? So I don't know.
Find somebody that would do that work.
Yeah.
I think it's I don't want to overspeak, but it deals with perseverance. I think that's the part of the blessing that the Lord gives to those who are ordained, is that persevering spirit in the difficulty of ministry. And preparing Timothy for ministry, Paul is not saying it's going to be easy. And right there at the end of chapter 4, what does Paul charge him with after saying, having the elders lay their hands on you? Be diligent in these matters. Give yourself wholly to them, so that everyone may see your progress. Watch your life and doctrine closely. Preserve that and persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers. I think that's the blessing that is being set apart for the Christian minister. And it is perhaps, you don't want to get too superstitious with it, but to not lay your hands on it is in some ways communicating that you don't need that. you don't need to be diligent. You don't need to have that blessing from the Lord in continuing and persevering well in the ministry. And so I think it's perhaps, gird your loins preparation. We are putting our hands on you to help prepare you for the work that is ahead of you in the name of Christ. Maybe.
A picture of your insufficiency. I like that.
Yes. But how about the right hand of fellowship? Jared called it the right hand of friendship. And so I want to know, is that like the Yankee version?
Or the backslap of fellowship? Yeah.
Backslap.
It's showing something of you're joining the ranks of those that are already ordained. These are the people who laid hands on you. They've called you apart to this, and you're, in a sense, welcoming them into that guild, in a sense.
Question: if someone doesn't have their hands laid on them, are they ordained? Is this essential? Is this necessary?
It seems to read that way, that prayer and laying on of hands are the necessary parts. The right hand of fellowship is a proper, but not necessary.
And so we would say that if you omitted the laying on of hands, it would at least make it an improper ordination. It's a very interesting question. Why did they not lay hands on you, Scott?
It was March 15th, 2020.
Yeah.
But no, Randy intervened because they were debating it and said, no, the BCO says we must do this, so we must do this. So they did.
When were you ordained?
They had gloves on. Does that count?
Doesn't count.
That's just skin to skin contact.
Gross.
I was 2011 and nobody had even heard of COVID by then. So back then.
Ooh. I was in 2016, February 21st. All right. I'm trying to
17:3.
all I can think about right now is a joke my friend used to tell was that when people come into the church, you give them the right hand of fellowship, but when you get them out of the church, you're giving them the left foot of fellowship. Anyway, all right, or maybe the left boot. I forget. 17:3.
Das Boot.
As every ecclesiastical office, according to the scriptures, is a special charge, no man shall be ordained unless it be to the performance of a definite work. We are ordained to something, not to nothing. Morton Smith said the Bible does not envision people simply ordained to hold an office. Ordination in the Bible is to a particular task, as in the case of Saul and Barnabas, and he points us to Acts 13. And so you have to have a call to a definite work. We've had a situation on our credentials committee before where I've had a man ask if he can come and take all of his ordination exams and then go to the floor of Presbytery and take all of his ordination exams. So that way, when he finally gets a call, he would be all set to go and be ordained. And we have politely but very confidently said, no, you have to have a call to a definite work in order to pursue and fulfill all the things required for ordination. And so until you have that, we're not going to sort of, get you all the way there sort of pending a call. You got to have the call in hand. Same thing's true of deacon and elders. Yeah.
I can empathize with that guy. That's how I felt in seminary. Just let's get this behind me so that when I'm ready to accept a call, I can just go execute that call.
Yeah.
We'll get into this in the next chapter, in 18, probably a little more, but you don't want to hold off on the parts before ordination. You might not be able to be ordained, but that doesn't mean you start the process for ordination the day you want to be ordained. You should probably prepare before then. But I wish I could have been ordained without a call, but I understand what the Bible teaches.
Yeah, it's
unfortunately.
It can be a bad sign if somebody seems to want the title but not the work.
Yeah.
There has to be a need for the work and to do the work of the pastor, of the elder, of the deacon, in order for you to be ordained to that work. So I think that's a good reminder that there has to be, you can't be a free range pastor. You're just pastoring random people, or you have the title if anybody wants to come to you. You're pastor of the community, something like that. I mean, I have heard of people trying to say, like, I want to be a kind of a pastor of the neighborhood, but I don't have a church. No, you can't do that.
I like the phrase in here. It gets at what you were drawing attention to at the beginning, that every ecclesiastical office is a special charge. It's not a sacrament, but there is something here that is significant and set apart. Of course, that's language we use about the ordained offices, but it's a special charge, and so it should be handled with lots of care, lots of attention. And Scott, I like your point. That's what 18 is going to get into in detail. Some of the preparations necessary because it is quite a weighty call to be ordained to office. So any final thoughts here?
17 maybe 17 is so short because of the next 10 chapters or so, where you do get through the lengthy processes for what ordination looks like, what calls look like, and all of those details. And so it's kind of like a preparatory chapter to prepare you for what's to come ahead over the next, basically through the end of this first part of the BCO.
Yeah, I was surprised and interested by some of Smith's language of, there's ordination, there's installation, and he even calls it the secondary ordination. If you're called to a different work, in some ways, you have the processes playing out again. Are you called to that work? You have to be approved to that work. And then there's not the original ordination with the laying on of hands, but there is this installing that has to happen that we say should happen. And it's just interesting. He calls that a secondary ordination. It's a different way of thinking about it.
Well, as old sunglasses would say, this podcast is over. Thanks for joining us. If you're interested in learning more about anything that we've discussed, do check out the show notes in your podcast player or at politymatters.org. If you've enjoyed the show, consider following us on Twitter or Facebook at Polity Matters, and you can subscribe in your podcast app of choice. Questions or comments can be directed to us on social media, or you can email us directly at politymattersfeedback@gmail.com. Thanks again for spending your time with us. Until next time, say goodbye, gentlemen.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, gentlemen.
Y'all take care.